Hello and welcome back. In today's video, we want to talk about how do you actually make profit on Amazon. My name is Iani. I'm a seven-figure e-commerce seller. I've sold over £5 million on Amazon, and I've also sold on pretty much every other platform there is. I also own a full-service Amazon agency called EcommerceVille. We work with over 20 brands on Amazon, anywhere from the furniture niche to supplements, grocery, pretty much everything you can think of. We do all the listing creation, ads, all the fun stuff when it comes to Amazon. So now let's get into the video. Today I want to speak about how do you actually make profit on Amazon. I know that this might sound quite funny of how do you make profit. Well, we need to buy a product cheaper than what you sell it for. And that is true, but it's not as simple as that. First, you need to start with the gross margin. Example, if your gross margin is 30%, that means before ads and before you pay yourself, how much do you actually need for you to make a profit? The example of 30% margin, let's say you've done £10,000 in sales. 30% margin means you're left with 3,000 before you pay yourself and any other overhead. But what did we miss on that 30%? You don't have the advertising inside, and advertising is super important. That's why a general rule of thumb is always, if you can, get products that have more than 30% gross margin. This way you can play with ads. Now, of course, it depends from niche to niche. If you're selling premium goods with one-off purchases, usually you need even a higher margin. Why is that? Because you won't have recurring customers. Yes, the more you sell organically, you start getting more sales organically, but it's not going to be as much as someone who's selling on supplements. That being said, over 30%, ideally 40 plus is the sweet spot. Okay, we know our margin now is 40%. Now we need to make sure that we make profit. And how do we make profit? Making sure that we spend less than that 40% margin. So knowing that you can really afford, if you want to be profitable, to spend up until 40% of your ads if you're doing 40% margin. So your tacos, total advertising cost of sale, needs to be 40%. Where does it become complicated? When you're launching a product at the beginning, many times you're going to spend more because you don't have many reviews, you're not established in the market, you don't have momentum of sales, your conversion rate is not there yet, you don't have the history of selling that product, so it's going to be a bit more difficult and more expensive to get to that point. So many times what happens is, and you see a very nice graph here, is you start and you, let's say you do $10,000 the first month, but you spent $4,000 for ads. So you really broke even to lost money. Then the second month, because now you're having more momentum, and if it's a recurring type of product, supplements, grocery, you'll see that now you spent $4,000 in ads, but now you have $12,000 in sales, and so on and so forth. That's where you really make money, because the first purchase you might not make much, break even or lose money, but the second, third, and fourth purchase, you start making money. And always remember, sales are amazing, but profit is what feeds you, profit is what sells your business, and profit is what actually pays you. So what we always look in the agency is, are we increasing market share? Is our product actually becoming more established and getting more market share? Are we making more sales? Of course. Are we making more sales? Yes. And are we making more profit than we did last month? Because if we're doing £10,000 in sales the first month, and in a year we're doing £100,000 a month, but we're not really making anything, that's not a position you want to be in. And I do understand sometimes with certain categories you might have to take a profit hit, but you need to understand and have a strategy when you're making the profit. So understanding your gross margin is the minimum. And of course, then you want to know your overheads of how much you're paying for rent, how much you're paying for team members, if you have any, how much you're paying yourself. You want to understand that. But if you understand your gross margin, then you know how much you need to play with ads. And always, for me, ideally, if I'm having a product that has 40% gross margin, and if I can get to tacos of 10 to 15%, that's a sweet point, because that leaves me with anywhere between 25 and 30% margin. And then I can play with that and pay myself, pay the team, invest in new product. Because that's what you need to understand, that if you really want to keep on growing, you need to invest more in stock, get more stock, and maybe launch even more products. So making profit on Amazon, it's a mathematical equation, but it's also a logical, you having to understand how you make profit on Amazon equation. Meaning, you know the 40% margin is there, you know you need to be careful of not spending more than 40% margin. If you understand that, you're already ahead of most brand owners. We speak with brand owners a lot. In the last year, I've spoken with hundreds of brand owners. And the amount of people that don't know their margins, I'm not talking about net margin, I'm talking about gross margins. They know their cost of goods, but they haven't really done the math of the fees and how much it costs them to sell X product and how much they have after that. The amount of brands that don't know that, it's crazy. So you're kind of flying blind. If you know your profit margin is 40%, you know where your figures need to be. Instead of obsessing about ACOS, advertising cost of sales, you need to be obsessing of, am I growing my market share? Am I having a lot of sales velocity? Am I having good conversion rate? Is my product getting more established? And am I making more profit? because a good brand is a profitable brand. A bad brand is an unprofitable brand. Not everyone will be lucky enough and hype enough to get VCs to fund them. Most brands need to be self-sustainable and need to have positive cash flow to make sure that they actually survive. In my opinion, in 2025, if you really want to do well on Amazon, you need to be self-sustainable, you need to be profitable, and cash flow positive. You get those three right, sky's the limit. I hope you liked this video. A lot more to come. Stay tuned.